My name is Adrian. I'm 26 years old and work in IT. Until last Christmas, I lived with my mum. I thought we had a solid relationship, one built on mutual support, shared history, and love. I believed we had a quiet understanding of what we had been through together, especially after years of navigating life as just the two of us. I never imagined how quickly that foundation could crack and crumble completely in a single day. After graduating college, I moved back home, thinking it would be a temporary arrangement. I was eager to start my career and get financially stable, but I also knew my mum could use some help. She had always worked hard, but the bills never seemed to stop piling up. I figured my moving back in would help us both. I could save money for a place of my own, and she'd have support with household expenses. What started as a short-term solution turned into something much bigger. I became more than just a son living at home. I became a provider. Before long, I was paying rent, covering utilities, handling groceries, and stepping in when her credit card payments fell behind. At first, I did it out of a sense of duty. I told myself it was only right to give back to the person who had raised me. But over time, it began to feel less like giving and more like being taken from. Still, I didn't complain. I told myself she was just going through a hard time. My mum had always had a strong personality, a tendency to make things about her, to cast herself as the centre of any room, especially when something went wrong. I overlooked it. I chalked it up to stress, or years of being a single mother, or simply the exhaustion that life can bring. I tried to be patient. I didn't expect gratitude, but I did hope for understanding, for some shared acknowledgement of how much I was carrying. Then came Christmas. I remember it vividly, how warm and festive everything looked. The lights were glowing, the smell of roasted ham and sweet potatoes filled the air, and we were gathered around the table like we had so many times before. I was mid-bite, literally chewing, when she said it, cold, calm, and loud enough that everyone heard. "Adrian, you need to move out. This just isn't working anymore." There was no warning, no signs, no conversation beforehand, just a flat statement delivered in front of family, as if it were a casual observation. My fork hovered in the air. I couldn't process it at first. I remember feeling the blood drain from my face, the sharp silence that followed, the way no one quite knew where to look. I didn't say much. I couldn't. I was stunned. That moment shattered more than just the holiday. It shattered something deeper, my understanding of who my mother was and what I had meant to her. For so long, I thought we were a team. I thought my sacrifices mattered. But that night made it painfully clear. My role in her life was not what I had believed it to be. Looking back, I see now that the signs were there. I had just chosen not to see them. Christmas Day had always been a big deal in our house. My mum, I'll call her Teresa, treated the holiday like an Olympic event. Every year, she pulled out the same dusty bins of decorations and transformed our home into a festive wonderland. Lights draped over every surface, the scent of cinnamon and pine lingering in every room. She'd spend weeks planning the menu, rehearsing the guest list, polishing silverware we only ever used once a year. For all the dysfunction we lived with the rest of the year, Christmas was our ceasefire, our moment of peace. This year seemed no different. The house looked beautiful. The tree sparkled with ornaments I remembered from childhood, and the table was set like something out of a magazine. Family came in from out of town, cousins, uncles, aunts. Everyone gathered in the living room, plates full, drinks in hand, laughter bouncing off the walls. For a brief moment, I let myself believe everything was okay, maybe even good. I gave Teresa her gift, a sleek new tablet she'd been hinting about since summer. She smiled, said thank you, and gave me a side hug in front of everyone. It wasn't overly affectionate, but it was public. That meant something. After dinner, as people were finishing up dessert and refilling their drinks, Teresa stood up. She tapped her wine glass with a spoon, the sound cutting through the chatter. "I have an announcement," she said, smiling, as though she were about to deliver a funny story or a heartfelt toast. I smiled too. She loved attention. I braced for something light, something sentimental or silly. Then she said it. "Adrian will be moving out. It's time he started his own life elsewhere." The words hit like a slap. For a few seconds, I didn't register what she'd said. My first instinct was to laugh. Surely this was a joke. But when I looked at her face, I saw no humour, just resolve. Cold, emotionless resolve. The room fell into an awkward silence. My aunt coughed. One of my cousins chuckled, probably thinking it was a joke. But I knew better. I locked eyes with her, searching for some hint that she was playing, some flicker of warmth. But there was nothing. No wink, no smile, no apology. Just a stiff posture and an expression that said she'd already moved on. I didn't respond. I didn't trust my voice, and I sure as hell wasn't about to let her see me spiral in front of everyone. Later that night, after the guests had trickled out and the dishes were stacked in the sink, I found her in the kitchen and asked quietly, "Why would you do that? Why tonight? Why like that?" She didn't even stop wiping the counter. "You've stayed long enough," she said casually. "It's time." That was it. No discussion, no reasons, no affection. Just a curt dismissal, as if I were a tenant whose lease had run out. I stood there for a few seconds, waiting for her to elaborate. She didn't. She didn't care to. I went to my room, shut the door, and just stood in the middle of it, staring at the walls. This was the same room I grew up in. Same posters on the wall, same desk I did homework on, the same floor I paced when I was trying to figure out my next move in life. I had given so much of myself in this house, my money, my time, my energy. And now I was being pushed out like an unwanted guest. I started packing that night. Not because I wasn't angry, believe me I was, but because I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of a scene. If she wanted me gone, I'd leave. But I would do it on my terms, quietly, with dignity, no outbursts, no begging. That night marked the beginning of something I hadn't anticipated. The unravelling of not just our living arrangement, but of the story I'd always told myself about who we were to each other. That night, after everyone left and the house fell quiet, I sat in my room with my suitcase open on the bed. I wasn't even sure what to pack. Essentials, I told myself, just enough to get by. I moved through the motions on autopilot, folding shirts, grabbing charger, croissants, stuffing toiletries into a backpack. I avoided looking at the photos on the dresser or the books still lined up on the shelf. Every item felt heavier than it should have. I didn't sleep. I just waited for the sun to rise so I could leave without another word. Around 2 a.m, I called my friend Marcus. We hadn't talked much in the weeks leading up to Christmas. Life had gotten in the way, but the second he picked up, I broke the news. He didn't even ask for details. "Come crash here for a while," he said. "Seriously, don't think twice." By dawn, I was gone. I slipped out the front door quietly like a guest leaving a hotel. I didn't cry. I thought I would, but I didn't. I felt empty, not angry, not heartbroken, just disconnected, like something inside me had been unplugged. I looked back at the house one last time, every window still dark, the wreath on the door swaying in the wind. For a second, I wondered if Teresa would even notice I'd left. Then I got in the car and drove away. Marcus's place wasn't big, just a 2-bedroom apartment with second-hand furniture and a persistent leaky faucet. But it felt like a sanctuary. He handed me a spare key and a blanket, and I crashed on his couch that night without saying much. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of coffee brewing and the smell of bacon. "You're not alone," he said, handing me a mug. I didn't say thank you out loud, but I hope he heard it anyway. It was there, in that borrowed space, that I finally let the reality sink in. not just what had happened on Christmas, but everything leading up to it. The years I had spent trying to hold things together, the sacrifices I'd made, financial, emotional, personal, just to keep the peace in a house that never really felt peaceful. I had tried to be the glue, the stability, the adult in the room. And for what? For someone who, in the end, saw me as dispensable. Within a week, I found a studio apartment. It wasn't much, just 4 walls, a window, and enough space for a bed and a desk. But it was mine. The first night I moved in, I sat on the floor eating takeout from a paper container, the only light coming from a lamp I'd picked up at a thrift store. It felt strange, quiet, almost too quiet. But then I noticed something else beneath the strangeness. Peace. There were no passive-aggressive remarks about how late I worked, no guilt-laced questions when I ordered delivery instead of cooking, no lectures about how she had sacrificed everything the moment I tried to set a boundary. There was just silence and freedom. In that stillness, I could finally hear myself think. I could finally breathe. And in that breathing space, I began to understand something I hadn't been ready to admit before. Maybe what happened on Christmas wasn't just an act of cruelty. Maybe it was a release, a push I didn't know I needed, a rupture that forced me out of a life that had quietly been suffocating me. It hurt. God, it hurt. But slowly, I was beginning to see it for what it might be, the beginning of something better. Not easier, maybe, but healthier. Honest. Mine. I thought that would be the end of it, that we go our separate ways, let things cool down, and maybe, someday, begin to rebuild what had been broken. I figured that, with some space and time, the sting of that Christmas day would fade into something we could talk about with clarity. But I underestimated Teresa's need to control the narrative. Within days of my quiet departure, I started hearing whispers. Not directly, but through mutual relatives, vague texts, and awkward silences during phone calls that used to be warm. At first, I didn't think much of it, just the usual gossip that circulates in families. But then, someone forwarded me a screenshot of a post from my cousin's Facebook. Some people forget who was there for them, sad how quick they walk away. It didn't name me, but it didn't have to. What followed was a slow unravelling of my reputation within the family. Teresa had told them I had abandoned her, that I left suddenly without reason or discussion, that I had ruined Christmas and turned my back on everything she'd done for me. To hear her tell it, I was an ungrateful, selfish son who'd left his poor, devoted mother all alone. At first, I ignored it. I didn't want to stoop to her level. I told myself the truth didn't need defending, that the people who really knew me would see through it. But that hope dissolved the day I noticed my Aunt Maria, who used to bake me birthday cakes, who called me her bonus son, had not only blocked me on Facebook, but sent me a final cutting message. Family means showing up, not disappearing when things aren't easy. I expected better from you. I stared at that message for a long time. It was like the ground shifted beneath me. I realised then that this wasn't just petty gossip. Teresa wasn't just spinning the story, she was rewriting the entire script. And people were believing it. The betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible. I had spent years bending over backward to help her, carrying responsibilities most people my age were just beginning to understand. I had been the one putting groceries in the fridge, keeping the lights on, paying down her debt when she got overwhelmed. And somehow, I was now the villain of her story? That's when I knew I had to speak up, not to retaliate, but to reclaim the truth. So I did something I never imagined I'd have to do. I told my side of the story. I opened a blank document, sat at my tiny studio apartment's desk and wrote. I kept it calm, honest, measured, no venom, no accusations, just the facts. I posted it to social media. I didn't name Teresa or call out anyone else. I simply shared what had happened, how I had supported my mum financially for years, how I was asked to leave with no warning on Christmas Day, and how I had chosen to walk away quietly rather than make a scene. I talked about what it felt like to be pushed aside after giving so much and how I was trying to start over in peace. The post wasn't dramatic. It wasn't meant to go viral. It was just my truth. Something I needed to say aloud, if only for my own peace of mind. But the response surprised me. Some relatives reached out privately, apologizing for assuming the worst. A few admitted they had only heard Teresa's version and hadn't thought to ask me. Others stayed silent, but that silence too told me everything I needed to know. I wasn't trying to win anyone over. I wasn't asking for pity, I just wanted clarity. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had taken something back. My voice, my story, my self-respect. What I didn't expect was for the post to go viral. I had written it for clarity, for closure, not for attention. I just wanted my side of the story to live somewhere outside of Teresa's carefully curated narrative. But within hours, the post started gaining traction. First a few comments, then a dozen shares, then hundreds. By the end of the week, it had been shared over 1,000 times. Strangers I'd never met were commenting, messaging me, telling me they saw themselves in my story. People from all walks of life, sons, daughters, even parents, thanked me for saying what they had always been too afraid to say. But the most surprising messages didn't come from strangers. They came from my own family. Slowly, one by one, my relatives began to reach out. Cousins who had once stopped inviting me to family events. Uncles I hadn't heard from in years. Aunts who had once believed every word Teresa said. Their messages started with hesitation. I didn't know, or I'm sorry I didn't ask you what happened, but they ended with truth. Some admitted they'd always sensed something was off, but didn't know how to address it. Others said they had never questioned Teresa because she was so convincing. It was validating, yes, but also painful. Painful to know that I had been misunderstood for so long, that the damage done in the wake of Teresa's words had stuck because people didn't know or didn't bother to ask for the full picture. But then came the message I least expected, a DM from my younger sister, Alina. We hadn't been close in years. After high school, she and I had started to drift. She lived with Teresa, sir, and while we were never openly hostile, there had always been a quiet divide between us. I assumed she'd taken Teresa's side by default. I figured she saw me the way everyone else had been taught to see me, ungrateful, distant, difficult. But her message, it stunned me. She wrote, "I just read your post, and I need you to know something. Everything you said, it made things click for me. I've been scared to talk about this, scared to admit what it's been like living here. But you weren't wrong. Teresa has become unpredictable, controlling, sometimes cruel, and I'm sorry. I should have said something sooner." She went on to say that she'd been walking on eggshells for years, that the emotional manipulation I described wasn't just something in my head, it was real. It was part of a pattern, a way Teresa exerted power over us, not just through money or guilt, but through silence, through isolating us from each other. Alina's message hit me like a wave. I reread it 3 times before I could even form a response. For years, I had felt like I was screaming into a void, trying to explain something no one else could see. But now, someone did see it, someone who had been living through it too. I replied simply at first. "Thank you for saying that. I didn't know if anyone else ever noticed." We kept messaging that night back and forth, cautiously rebuilding a bridge I thought had long since burned. Her words didn't just offer comfort, they cracked something open. For the first time since Christmas Day, I didn't feel alone in this mess. I didn't feel like I was just some bitter, dramatic son spinning a revenge story. I felt seen, understood, validated. It was a turning point, not just in how others saw me, but in how I saw myself. I wasn't crazy, I wasn't heartless. I had just been living in an environment that demanded silence, and now I had finally spoken. And someone else had finally spoken back. Over the next few weeks, Alina and I truly reconnected for the first time in years. Our conversations, once occasional and surface level, became raw, honest, and sometimes tearful. We talked about everything: our childhood, the things we hadn't dared to admit out loud, and the emotional knots we'd both carried for so long. We realised how much we had in common, not just in our love for music or inside jokes from years ago, but in the quiet, invisible weight Teresa had placed on our shoulders. She told me how hard it had been to live in that house, how Teresa's moods dictated the energy of the day. Some mornings were light and casual, others were tightropes. There were guilt trips about not calling enough, accusations about being ungrateful, or the ever-present reminder that everything Teresa had done was for us. Alina said she had spent years trying to be the good daughter, just to avoid conflict. But after reading my post, something in her shifted. She made the decision to move out, just like I had. I offered her my couch until she could find her own place. She hesitated at first, worried about being a burden, but I reminded her that this wasn't charity. It was solidarity. She wasn't alone anymore, neither of us were. Helping her through that transition gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in a long time. I helped her pack, found her a second-hand dresser online, and showed her how to budget in a way Teresa had never let us learn. It was strange, comforting even, to be able to show up for someone who needed it without strings, without expectation, and without drama. It wasn't just about healing myself anymore. It was about making sure the cycle of manipulation and silence ended with us. Then, one afternoon, everything came full circle. There was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, Teresa stood there. She looked different, smaller somehow, tired. Her makeup wasn't done like it usually was, and her posture carried none of the performative pride I'd grown used to. She clutched her purse tightly in one hand, eyes already glossy with tears. "I just want to talk," she said. Against every instinct that told me to protect my peace, I let her in. We sat across from each other in the living room, the same room where I'd found clarity, and now, maybe, closure. She didn't launch into excuses or accusations. She just sat there quietly for a while, eyes darting around the apartment like she was looking for parts of herself. Then she started to cry. "I miss you," she said. "I didn't mean to hurt you." There was a time when that would have broken me, when I would have rushed to comfort her, to reassure her, to put her pain above my own. But something inside me had shifted. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I didn't accuse. I just let her speak. When she was